Today what I want to give you is just a very basic introduction into editing objects. Objects, you know, there are different objects that you can insert into Blender, but of course they're boring. They're cubes and spheres and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a couple cool ones. If you get to play with the meta balls, those are really fun because they stick to each other like goo. And they, as you pull them away from each other, they kind of stretch and stuff. Those are fun. But they have very limited applications. You know, I mean, water effects or something like that, although there is a water simulator and water objects in Blender, so metaballs aren't even great for water anymore, at least, unless you were doing something very specific with it. But the objects are boring. So what I want to do is I want to go through just how these objects are made. Okay, what's in, you know, how are they made inside the application here, and how you can start to alter them. Okay, so let's just take our cube here, and there we go there. And whenever you have selected an object, okay, you can go down here. And you see where it says object mode? There's a bunch of modes here, but you can go into edit mode. And when you go into edit mode, you're going to get a few more controllers down here, and they're going to be very, very important. But before we do that, let's just kind of go over this. Three-dimensional objects are made of, at least in Blender, three pieces or three parts. The first is a vertex or a point. So at the corner, or I should say at each one of the corners of this object, you can see that we have a point here. And I can stretch and move that point if I right-click on it to select it. So that's pretty typical. If I go down here and I go to Edge Select mode, I can right-click on an edge. So an edge is the line that is drawn between 2 points, and it forms an edge, okay, of an object. Okay, now you can see that I was able to grab that, select that, and I can move it up and down, whatever I want. And then lastly, we have faces or face select mode. And when I hit face select mode, now I can grab the space between all the points. So when you have an object that is a closed object, okay, you then have a face in the middle, and now I can grab that whole thing. For better illustration, let's delete this, X to delete, and we're going to add a sphere. So I'm just going to add a mesh UV sphere. Tab key, by the way, gets you into edit mode, okay? And now you can kind of see that I have all these different faces here. And right now, it looks like a mirror ball, doesn't it? Okay? A very important principle of 3D animation is that the number of faces is proportional to the smoothness of the object. So the more faces you have, the smoother the object is going to be. The negative to that is that the more complicated the object gets, i.e. the more faces that it has, it takes up more memory, number one, so the computer has a harder time handling it, dealing with it, holding it in its memory systems, and you're going to have a harder time editing it. So it's much easier to edit something that has less faces and less vertices and edges than something that has more. Luckily enough, we actually have a modifier that smooths out the objects, okay, which I'll show you later. So you can edit objects that have a few faces, and then when you're done, you can add this modifier to have it smooth out your object and make it nice and round and so on and so forth. So right here, it looks like a mirror ball. But if I were to go to the modifier and I go to the subdivision surface modifier, what it does is something we call subdividing. In other words, it divides into multiple pieces what used to be one face. So I do that, and then I can increase the smoothness here. And what's neat about the subdivision surface modifier is that when I go back into the edit mode, you can see it's still the same number of faces that I can edit with. So that's a cool little modifier. We'll do more with that later. I don't want you to be adding faces just for the sake of adding them, but it's important for you to understand the theory behind the idea that the more faces you have, it's basically like photography. You have a higher resolution in your object, and so it will appear smoother. But we can add that later. It's much better to to edit with an object that has less faces. So again, here I can grab a face and I can start to stretch it out. Okay? And you'll notice how all the other faces, because they're all connected, will start to stretch and respond to what I've done to modify the object. Okay? You can also just hit the G key, which is G for grab, and you can move it around. But the problem with that is, depending upon your perspective or your viewpoint in your user view, you might be moving it in a dimension that you don't want to move it in, and it's very hard to see. Now, let's just take a look at what I've done here. And I've pulled this face out here, and these side pieces are working really well, but you'll notice that it's asking a lot of the object to do this kind of shape here, which is kind of like a triangle. So if I were to go back to our modifier, let's add our subdivision again, okay? You can kind of see what it would do. It would just kind of add this blob at the end, which is cool, but what if I wanted a heavy edge crease right here? Well, one of the things that you can do is you can start to delete faces or points and reconnect them. So this is kind of fun. So I can hit right-click on the face there, and I can hit the X key. And now you'll notice it's going to ask me, what do I really want to delete? If I choose vertices, then it's going to delete all 4 points right here. So let's do that. And it just rips a hole right in the middle and deletes a lot of stuff. I really didn't want to do that, so undo. If I hit X again, it asks me if I want to delete just the edges. Well, in this case, not always, but in this case, it's going to do basically the same thing. Not quite the same thing, but basically the same thing. You'll notice it left a couple pieces that it didn't leave before. But what I can do, if I just want to empty this face but keep all the edges, I can hit the X key, and then I can delete only the face. And now what I've got is I've got this nice hole here. So what I can do is I can go down to vertice mode, and I'm going to right-click on one of my vertices, and then I'm going to hold the Shift key down, and I'm going to right-click on another one. And now I'm going to hit the F key. I think of it as F for fill. But between two lines, what you're filling is you're making an edge. So you're filling. Boom. Now notice that I've got this new line that popped in between the 2 points. 2 points at a time. You got to go slowly with this. It's really, sometimes people want shortcuts. There aren't really a lot of shortcuts here. Then I can hold the Shift key down one more time. Now you can see how I've got all 3 points. I've now enclosed the shape. If I've really done this correctly, I hit the F key, and now I've filled that section. Hold the Shift key down, fill those 3 like that, and now I've gotten a face back. And you can see how that shape right there makes a lot more sense than the other 2 shapes that are here. In fact, you can even see that essentially this shape, look right here, you can see how it actually has a crease going down it, okay? Even though there isn't a line going from this vertice to this vertice. There's no line there. But it's basically being forced to make one. Whereas here, because of the way I redrew the vertices and made them into triangles, essentially, it's able to make a different shape. Now, I could do that. Let's, so I can select all of them, hit X, delete just the face. And now I could connect these 2 here, hit the F key. You can fill multiple faces at once, so F. And now you can see I've got a completely different look for the bottom corner. And a lot of it just depends on what you want to do, you know, with the shape, and you'll get a feel for that. It takes a lot of experience. I could sit here and show you 1,000 different techniques for modeling in three-dimensional objects, but unless you really start to do it, it's going to be really tough for you to really understand what I'm saying. So basically, for this very short demo, when you're modifying a three-dimensional object, okay, you have three things that you can work with, at least in the mesh objects, okay? Mesh objects are basically points, edges, and faces. And mesh objects make up a large portion of what you make in 3D animation. Now, before I let you go, one last thing. There are a ton of other tools that when you went to the edit menu, or the edit mode, I should say, this menu popped up. You can rotate things, you can shrink them, scale them, you can do all sorts of deformations of geometry, smoothing, loop cuts and slides. We're going to deal with those. Subdivide. So let me just show you the subdivide. I don't usually use it, but let me just select this face, and if I hit subdivide, you'll see it divides it into 4 pieces now. So now I've got the same basic face, but now it's been divided into 4 pieces, and I can go about my business. The negative to this is oftentimes the subdivision doesn't do exactly what you want. So now you can see that this point here is kind of hanging off in midair, and it's not connecting to anything except these points here. And really, I would want it connecting back to these 2 points here and here. So I would have to go through, empty this face, reconnect the points, yada, yada, yada. So sometimes the subdivision is good and sometimes it's bad. I'm going to undo it here. There's all sorts of things you can spin. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do in here that I would highly encourage you to play with. This is going to be the foundation for really creating our first animation. We're going to be building an object. It's going to require a little bit of this working with points, vertices, and faces. Just play around. Don't do anything that you're too serious about, because your first couple tries, I guarantee you're going to screw them up. It's just typical. I don't even want to think about how long it took me to really get comfortable with Blender and editing objects in Blender. Although I could show you some of the things that I built in the last couple of years in Blender, and you know, they're very complicated objects, and they're very cool, and some of them literally took me months to build. I mean, you can get really complicated characters, hair, fur, eyelashes. I mean, it's really cool, some of the stuff that you can do with Blender. It's a really great modeling program. It's really neat. Any questions about the basics of modeling? One of the really important things is to make sure you always check where you are. Are you in edit mode or are you in object mode? Edit mode allows you to alter the object itself, okay? But it can also screw you up a little bit, because edit mode will also allow you to actually add objects. So I can actually add a new object in here, and then it becomes part of the same object. So if I put this over here and I say add, and I add a cube, then when I get out of edit mode and go to object mode, when I slide this around, they come together. Yeah, a lot of people will get into edit mode by accident, and then they'll pop a new object in there, and then all of a sudden they don't understand why they're always moving together, okay? That's why. So if that happens, your only recourse basically is to go in, and then you have to select. Let's say this wasn't selected. You have to select the object you want to delete. See, hold the Shift key down and select everything, and then hit the X key to delete, and just delete vertices, and then there we go. Okay, everything should go away after you delete enough. You might have to hit the delete a few times to get the whole object to go away. You can hit A for select all, but the problem with that is it would select both objects. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so A is select all, which is kind of cool. You can move things around. The other one last important thing about an object is an object has a center point. You can see it right here. Okay? So now that I've moved that object away from the center point, if I go back into object mode and I hit the rotate tool, you'll notice that now it rotates in a kind of an odd fashion. So you want to be careful with that. Well, that's interesting. I hit undo and it, oh, anyway. You want to be very careful with that so that you don't, you want that center point to be in the center of your object 99% of the time. Not always, but at least especially in the beginning, 99% of the time you don't want to move that object away from that center point, and it's always that little yellow dot that you see right there, okay? So just be careful of that. If objects aren't behaving the way you want them to, if they're spinning around an invisible axis basically, that's probably what you did. Okay? Any questions? All right, that's it.